A woman was found in her own home under strange and unsettling circumstances. There were no clues, no evidence, nothing for detectives to go on. It looked like the case would remain a mystery, but then an unexpected phone call turned the entire investigation on its head. And with just one unusual clue, detectives uncovered a truth no one could have predicted. Kathy Blair was born on May 31, 1961, in California. She grew up in a loving family with her parents, a brother, and a sister. From an early age, she had a deep passion for the arts, but music was what she loved the most. Singing was more than just a hobby, it was her true passion. So, when it was time to choose a career, Kathy didn't have to think twice. She knew exactly what she wanted. She enrolled at the University of Texas to study vocal performance and moved to Austin. After graduating, became a music teacher and a Christian choir instructor. She absolutely loved her job, and her students adored her. They could see how much heart she put into music, and her passion was contagious. Over the years, Kathy was married twice, but both marriages ended in divorce. She had 2 children, a son and a daughter, whom she raised on her own. In 2013, when she was 52, Kathy moved into a new home in a quiet, safe suburb of Austin. She had been dreaming of a place that checked all her boxes, and she had finally found the perfect one. By then, her children were grown and living on their own, while Kathy continued her work in music and led the choir. In December 2014, her son Joe came to stay with her for a few weeks. He was 23 and serving in the military. Before his next deployment, he wanted to spend some time at home with his mom. On December 5th, Joe went out to meet some friends and didn't return home until almost noon the next day. As he walked into the house, he called out for his mom, but there was only silence. Feeling uneasy, he started checking the rooms one by one until he reached Kathy's bedroom. What he saw there was horrifying. She was lying on the floor next to her bed, surrounded by a pool of blood. Joe knew immediately she was gone. Panicked, he ran outside and called the police. When investigators got there, they quickly confirmed that Kathy had been dead for several hours, and from the sheer amount of blood at the scene, it was clear this wasn't an accident. This was murder. While the medical experts examined the body, police officers began processing the crime scene. One of the first things they noticed was that the drawers from a large jewelry box in her bedroom had been pulled out and were scattered on the floor. It looked like the killer had taken some of Kathy's jewelry, leading detectives to consider robbery as the primary motive. But something about that theory felt off. For one, the intruder hadn't taken anything else. Valuable items like Kathy's laptop, phone, and other expensive things were left untouched, right out in the open. The house wasn't ransacked, and there was no sign that the killer had searched for anything beyond the jewelry. Then there was the timing. Break-ins at night were pretty uncommon. Most burglars preferred to strike during the day when homeowners were at work. On top of that, this particular neighborhood was considered one of the safest in the city. Crimes like this just didn't happen there. Another strange detail was the sequence of events. It seemed like the killer had murdered Kathy first and only then started searching for valuables. Blood stains on the jewelry box drawers and other parts of the bedroom suggested that the attack happened before the so-called robbery began. That meant the intruder must have attacked Kathy the moment they stepped into her bedroom. Adding to the mystery, there were no signs of forced entry at the front door, although investigators found that the back door had been left unlocked. When they asked Joe about it, he explained that his mother often left that door open. With all this in mind, detectives started to wonder, was this really a robbery or just a cover-up? What if the killer had planned to murder Kathy all along? And if that was the case, it raised an even more chilling question. Could the person responsible have known her? And if so, they also know about that unlocked back door? Despite their best efforts, forensic experts couldn't find any evidence that might lead them to the killer. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that could identify the person responsible. The only clue they managed to recover was a partial shoe print in Kathy's bedroom, left behind in her blood. The medical examiners determined that Kathy had died from multiple stab wounds and also showed signs of strangulation. However, there was no evidence of SA, which only reinforced detectives' suspicion that this wasn't a random crime. It seemed personal. With no physical evidence to go on, police shifted their focus to Kathy's inner circle, looking for anyone who might have had a reason to harm her. Naturally, they started with her son, since he theoretically had the opportunity to commit the crime. But after checking his alibi, detectives quickly ruled him out. He had spent the entire night with friends, and his whereabouts were confirmed. Next, they spoke with Kathy's friends and coworkers, hoping to uncover any conflicts or grudges. But according to everyone they interviewed, had no enemies. She was well-liked, never got into fights, and devoted most of her time to the choir. Just when it seemed like they had hit a dead end, detectives came across a lead. Several of Kathy's close friends mentioned that she had frequently talked about her second ex-husband, the man she had divorced 4 years before the murder. According to Kathy, their breakup had been anything but smooth. Her ex-husband wouldn't leave her alone, kept showing up, refusing to let go. At one point, she even told friends she was worried for her safety and asked them not to tell him where she had moved. Detectives tracked the man down and discovered he was living not far from Austin. When they went to speak with him, his reaction immediately raised red flags. The moment they mentioned Kathy's death, his first response was she shot? That struck them as odd. Why would he assume she had been shot, rather than stabbed or killed some other way? When asked about his whereabouts that night, he claimed he had been staying in his RV for a short getaway. He even let detectives search it without a warrant. But despite their suspicions, they found nothing. No weapons, no blood, no signs that he had anything to do with the crime. Without any concrete evidence, they couldn't pin anything on him. He remained on their radar, but with no real leads, detectives had no choice but to keep looking for other suspects. A few days later, detectives received an unexpected call from one of Kathy's friends, who had something strange to share. She and a few others had organized a memorial service in Kathy's honor, and during the ceremony, a man they didn't recognize stood up to give a speech. From the very first words out of his mouth, something fell off. His tone, his mannerisms, everything about him made the guests uneasy. But the strangest part was that no one there knew who he was. These were Kathy's closest friends, yet not a single one of them had ever seen this man before. And as he spoke, it became clear that he hadn't actually known Kathy either. His words didn't match reality, almost as if he was making things up on the spot. Curious, detectives asked around, and one of Kathy's friends finally recognized him. He had seen the man before. He worked as a sales clerk at a local women's clothing store. Police tracked this person down and questioned him. The man admitted he had never met Kathy. He said he had read about her murder in the news, felt sad, and decided to attend the memorial. His explanation was pretty weird, but there was no real evidence linking him to the crime. So, with nothing to hold him on, detectives had to move on, still searching for their killer. For several days, the case remained at a standstill until an unexpected twist changed everything. A man named Rob called the police, saying he had something they might want to see. According to his story, he had recently bought a new scope for his hunting rifle. This wasn't just any scope, it was equipped with a thermal imaging camera. Excited to test it out, he decided to take a walk in the early hours of December 6th, heading toward a wooded area near the edge of his neighborhood. As he walked, a car slowly drove past him before pulling over to the side of the road. A few seconds later, a man stepped out and headed down one of the nearby streets, disappearing into the night. At the time, Rob didn't think much of it, but later, when he saw the news about Kathy's murder, something clicked. The man he saw had been walking in the direction of her house. That's when he remembered his thermal camera had been recording the entire time. He went back and reviewed the footage, and there it was, the man, clearly visible, walking away from his car. Detectives were intrigued by the footage, but there was one major problem. It was recorded using thermal imaging, which meant it only captured the suspect's silhouette, so identifying him based on that alone would be nearly impossible. Still, the video provided some valuable clues. The man appeared to be tall, broad-shouldered, and had a distinct way of walking. And more importantly, the camera had also captured his car. Investigators hoped they could at least narrow down a list of possible vehicle models from the footage. They compared the man's height and build to their two main suspects, Kathy's ex-husband, and the strange man from the memorial, but neither of them matched the silhouette in the recording. Their cars didn't match either. This only deepened detectives' doubts about both men's involvement, effectively bringing them back to square one. Over the next few days, they kept analyzing the footage, trying to extract any useful details, while also searching for new potential suspects. But despite their efforts, nothing substantial came from it. The case, once again, was at a frustrating standstill. Then, on December 15th, everything changed. That morning, police received a call from a caretaker who had gone to check on an elderly couple, Billy and Sydney Shelton. As she approached their house, she immediately noticed something was wrong. The front door was wide open and there were clear signs of a forced entry near the lock. Stepping inside, she made her way to the bedroom and what she saw was horrifying. The couple was lying in a pool of blood, their bodies motionless. Without hesitation, she called the police. Medical examiners later confirmed that both victims had suffered multiple stab wounds, just like Kathy. Meanwhile, detectives noticed a chilling detail. The drawers of their jewelry box had been pulled out and scattered around the room, with all the jewelry missing. But just like in Kathy's case, nothing else of value had been taken. Detectives couldn't ignore the striking similarities between this crime and Kathy's murder. From the very beginning, considered the possibility that the same person was responsible. The victims lived just 15 minutes apart. Both attacks happened at night while the victims were sleeping, and in both cases the killer emptied their jewelry boxes but took nothing else of value. From the beginning, investigators had believed Kathy's murder might have been personal, committed by someone she knew. But now they had to reconsider everything. What if this wasn't about revenge or a personal grudge? What if the killer was choosing victims at random, based on some unknown pattern? Detectives looked for any connection between Kathy and the Sheltons, mutual friends, places they might have visited, anything that could link them. But there was nothing. Their lives had never crossed. That led to one chilling realization: they might be dealing with a serial killer. Now, this wasn't just about solving a murder, it was a race against time before he struck again. Police began re-interviewing everyone connected to the victims, hoping that someone would remember even the smallest detail that could lead them to the killer. They urged people to share anything, no matter how insignificant it might seem. And eventually, that approach paid off. One of Kathy's friends recalled a conversation they had a few months before her murder. Kathy had mentioned a disturbing encounter with a handyman who had been hired by her landlord to do some repairs on the house. She told her that the job had been done poorly, but more than that, something about the man's behavior had unsettled her. Detectives contacted the landlord, who was able to track down the worker's contact information. It was a local resident named Timothy Parl. The first thing detectives discovered was that Timothy's brother worked at the church regularly attended by the Sheltons, and Timothy himself had also been seen there. Then they dug into his background and found something even more concerning. Timothy had a long rap sheet. He had been arrested multiple times for theft, and his targets were almost always jewelry. At time of the investigation, Timothy was out on parole and living in a long-stay hotel. Detectives went to see him and he agreed to answer their questions, but when they asked to come up to his room, he refused. Instead, he insisted on speaking with them outside, in the hotel parking lot. At first, Timothy claimed he didn't remember Kathy, but when detectives provided more details, he suddenly recalled doing some repairs at her house. He insisted he had nothing to do with her murder and even said he had an alibi. Had been working the night shift at a convenience store when Kathy was killed. As they spoke, detectives couldn't help but notice that Timothy didn't seem to match the silhouette from the thermal camera footage. He was significantly shorter than the man in the video, and his car didn't resemble the one seen that night. So, with no solid evidence against him, they left empty-handed. But then something unexpected happened. When they called Timothy's employer to verify his alibi, they learned that he had been fired a week before Kathy's murder. There was no way he could have been working that night. Detectives immediately rushed back to the hotel, but Timothy was already gone. Instead, his wife answered the door and allowed them to search their room. That's when they finally caught a break. Inside, they found a pawn shop receipt showing that Timothy had sold several pieces of jewelry, and the date on the receipt was the same day Kathy was murdered. Detectives went straight to the pawn shop and quickly confirmed that the jewelry Timothy had sold belonged to Kathy. But that wasn't all. The shop's security cameras had captured footage of the parking lot, and what they saw there was even more interesting. Timothy hadn't arrived in his own car, which meant he had access to another vehicle. After running the plates, police discovered that the vehicle belonged to his sister, and that was a crucial detail because the car looked almost identical to the one caught on the thermal camera on the night of Kathy's murder. That was enough for detectives to secure a warrant to search the vehicle. As soon as forensic experts started examining the car, they found traces of blood on the front seat and the floor. When the lab results came back, they confirmed the worst. Was Kathy's blood. Right after that, police arrested Timothy and brought him in for questioning. But even when confronted with all the evidence, he refused to admit anything. Instead, he kept repeating the same phrase over and over. These hands have never killed anyone. Detectives interrogated Timothy for hours. Him on the evidence against him, and eventually he cracked, but not in the way they expected. He continued to insist that he hadn't killed anyone, but now claimed to know who did. According to him, the real murderer was a man named Sean. Naturally, investigators were skeptical. The case against Timothy was quite strong, and the sudden shift in blame felt like a desperate attempt to escape justice. Still, they decided to check out Sean just in case. Nothing about what they found screamed murderer. Sean Gantbinocasser, 30, was a former science teacher with a degree in microbiology, and he had no criminal record. On top of that, he lived several hundred miles from Austin, making his involvement seem even less likely. Still, detectives needed to be 100% sure, so they traveled to his town to question him. Sean admitted that he had met Timothy a few months prior and found him to be a shady character. They hadn't spoken much since. A few minutes later, he said something quite weird. He had actually been in Austin on the nights of both murders. Even more interesting, he revealed that he had stayed at Timothy's place during that time. The situation only grew more confusing from there. At first, Sean claimed that on the night of Kathy's murder, Timothy had left the house without saying a word, but just minutes later, he suddenly changed his story. Now, he admitted that they had actually gone to Kathy's house together. According to him, Timothy got out of the car and returned a few minutes later, carrying a blood-stained bag. Later, when Sean peeked inside, he saw some jewelry. That's when he realized Timothy had done something terrible. But he insisted he had no idea what was going to happen and had never planned to be part of any crime. As detectives continued questioning him, Sean asked to use the restroom and they let him step out. One of the investigators watched as he walked away, and that's when something clicked. His stride, his posture, his movement. It all looked eerily similar to the silhouette captured on the thermal camera the night Kathy was murdered. That raised a serious question. Detectives were no longer sure he was telling the truth. Now, they strongly suspected that Sean was the real killer. But without a confession, they had nothing solid to build a case against him. With Timothy, at least they had some physical evidence tying him to the crime. But with Sean, they had absolutely nothing. When he returned from the restroom, they kept pressing him, challenging his version of events. They told him they didn't believe he had stayed in the car and suggested that maybe Timothy had forced him into Kathy's house, threatening him in some way. It was a calculated move and it worked. Sean hesitated, then finally admitted that he had entered the house alone. According to him, he had gone inside only to steal valuables while Timothy waited outside. He said he slipped in through the unlocked back door, started looking through the rooms for anything worth taking. When he reached Kathy's bedroom, he saw the jewelry box, and Kathy still asleep in bed. Sean initially stuck to his story. He claimed he had carefully taken the valuables and left without harming Kathy. He even suggested that Timothy might have returned to the house after the robbery and committed the murder for reasons unknown to him, but detectives weren't buying it. They knew that blood had been found on the jewelry box, meaning the killer had only taken the valuables after the murder, which contradicted Sean's version completely. They kept pressing him, breaking down his lies piece by piece, and finally he cracked. Sean admitted that he had killed Kathy. According to him, as soon as he entered her bedroom, she woke up and lunged at him. Panicking, he pulled out a knife and stabbed her multiple times. Once she was dead, He grabbed the jewelry, rushed out of the house, and got back into the car. Detectives still had doubts about Sean's story. They found it hard to believe that Kathy had suddenly jumped at him and tried to grab his knife. But regardless of the details, his confession was enough to arrest him. To strengthen their case, they took his shoes and had forensic experts compare the soles to the bloody footprint found in Kathy's bedroom. It was a perfect match. However, there was still one major problem: the murder of the elderly couple. When detectives questioned Sean about it, his entire demeanor changed. He immediately asked for a lawyer and refused to say another word. With no evidence directly linking him to that crime, investigators were at a dead end. So they turned back to Timothy. He was arrested as an accomplice in Kathy's murder, and under Texas law, that meant he faced the same charges as Sean, even if he hadn't physically participated in the killing. Whether he liked it or not, he was going down with him. Timothy admitted that he had driven Sean to Kathy's house, but insisted that he had never stepped out of the car and had no idea his partner was going to kill her. However, he did confess to selling Kathy's stolen jewelry, which directly tied him to the crime. When detectives pressed him about the murder of the elderly couple, he admitted that he and Sean had gone there to rob the house as well. But just like before, he claimed that he had stayed in the car while Sean went inside. Investigators considered the possibility that Timothy was telling the truth. The thermal camera footage from Kathy's murder had clearly shown only one person exiting the vehicle. If the same pattern had been followed in the second crime, it was likely that Sean had acted alone once again. In the end, Timothy was charged in all 3 murders due to his role in the crimes, even though he hadn't committed the killings himself. As for Sean, he was officially charged with Kathy's murder, but detectives still weren't able to prove his involvement in the second case. At least not yet. The court ruled that Timothy and Sean would be tried separately. During his trial, Timothy maintained that he had no involvement in the murders and had no idea his partner was going to kill anyone. But that didn't change the fact that he had driven Sean to both crime scenes and profited from selling Kathy's stolen jewelry. In the end, the jury found him guilty and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sean's trial, however, was much more complicated. Unlike Timothy, who was directly linked to Kathy's case by physical evidence, the case against Sean rested mostly on his confession, a shoe print in Kathy's bedroom, and the thermal camera footage. His lawyer immediately went on the attack, claiming that detectives had coerced Sean into confessing and pressured him into taking the blame for someone else's crime. He also insisted that the rest of the evidence was purely circumstantial. As a result, the jury couldn't reach a unanimous verdict, forcing the judge to declare a mistrial. But prosecutors weren't giving up, and a few months later was back in court for a second trial. This time, the prosecution managed to convince the jury of Sean's guilt, and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole for Kathy's murder. However, despite strong suspicions, he was never officially charged in the killing of the elderly couple. Investigators were certain he had committed those murders as well, but without solid evidence, they couldn't make the charges stick. In the end, both men faced justice. There were still unanswered questions in the case. Detectives were never able to determine why Sean had killed his victims. If Kathy had really woken up while he was in the bedroom, he could have simply run away. It was pitch dark, and she wouldn't have been able to identify him. The only thing they could reasonably conclude was why Timothy had chosen Kathy as a target for the robbery. It seemed likely that he had held a grudge against her ever since she complained to her landlord about his poor quality repairs months earlier. That complaint had affected his paycheck. He may have resented her for it. Whether that resentment played a role in what ultimately happened that night, no one could say for sure. But one thing was clear: what started as a simple burglary had ended in cold-blooded murder. As for the elderly couple, detectives had no solid theories about the motive behind their murders. They considered the possibility that Timothy had interacted with them at church and that some kind of conflict had led to his resentment, just like with Kathy. But that was purely speculation. When it came to Sean, investigators couldn't rule out the possibility that he had no motive at all, that he simply wanted to kill. If that were the case, then there was every reason to believe that he would have continued murdering if he hadn't been caught. One final crucial detail about Sean's second trial was how much weight the prosecution placed on the thermal camera footage. That single piece of evidence ended up being the deciding factor in securing his conviction. If that neighbor hadn't decided to test out his new thermal scope in the middle of the night, if he hadn't happened to record the exact moment Sean left his car, the case against him might have fallen apart completely. Sean could have walked free. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.